Hi, friend. Happy Wednesday. It's so good to see you. Welcome to our little corner of the internet where we sit down with interesting, wonderful people such as yourself and successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, coaches to steal all their homework and use it for our everyday lives. So it's so good to see you. Before you ask, yes, this is recorded. You can watch it again on YouTube. You can watch it again on LinkedIn. You can listen to it on your favorite podcast network. So, hi to all the podcast listeners out there. Although, really, we kind of like it if you show up in real life because the chat is kind of where all the magic happens. Because this session is a little different than maybe others that you're used to coming to, because you have a seat at the table. We want your questions. We want your tips and tricks and tactics. If you know something that works, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with all of us. Sharing is caring. I'm really happy you took the time to be here today. And I'm really excited for you to meet our guest today because it was something that I felt really called to discuss and talk about. We had a session last week that was about public speaking. It's something that I know just freaks out 90% of people. And some of the messages that we got once we announced that we were going to be doing a mini workshop about public speaking was all about, how people can feel really good when they are going into, it could be a big meeting or a big presentation or a big speaking event, and almost like an actor with a script. They're kind of really good if everything stays according to script. But when all of a sudden during the Q&A or something diverts and you have to think quickly on your feet, and it goes from a scripted series, to use an example, to more of an improv, you have to be able to think on your feet. People were saying, oh my gosh, Kim, I get totally tongue-tied. I get totally caught up. Like, I was doing really well when I knew the trains were on the tracks, but the minute something else happened, I was completely thrown for a loop. And so when I was getting that sort of feedback in my LinkedIn messages, I was like, okay, we got to address this too, in addition to the public speaking. And so that's why I was really excited to bring on Matt, because this is Matt's expert subject area. Like, literally, this is what he does all day, every day. He helps people think on their feet, think quickly, and really represent themselves as the confident people that they are and that you are. So please, wherever you are in the world, help me welcome Matt to coffee with us. Hey,
Hey,
Matt.
Kim. Hey, Kim, it's great to be with you. I love your energy.
I'm so excited for you to be here because, like I said, we were getting a lot of messages for people that were struggling with this, and you've written a whole book on this. Literally, this is your subject area.
Absolutely. Speaking in the moment is something that many of us feel very anxious about. And in fact, if you think about it, most of our communication happens spontaneously. It's not the planned presentation or the pitch or the meetings with agenda. It's answering questions, giving feedback, making small talk. And for many of us, that can be really nerve-wracking.
Well, really nerve-wracking. And I also feel like I would imagine, I don't know, I'm sure you're going to be able to tell us, but hard to practice. So if it's something that you have the awareness where like you're not delusional, you're saying, I know that I'm not good at this. How does one even practice something like this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of counterintuitive notions in this work. First and foremost, all of us can get better. Many of us feel like I'm just not that person. I'm not born with the gift of gab. Yet in fact, we can all improve in our spontaneous speaking. And the other counterintuitive notion is you can actually prepare to be spontaneous. There are things you can do to help yourself, much like an athlete would do drills and preparation. So when they're in the game, which happens spontaneously, they can feel better and respond more appropriately. So we have to focus on our mindset and we have to focus on the way we craft our messages. And if we do both those things, we can do better in these spontaneous moments.
Please tell me that one of the mindsets is not be more zen, because I honestly feel like the more people tell me to like be calm and like go with it does the opposite. Like the
Right.
minute you're telling me to be zen, I am anti-zen. So when
I think Zen has its place. I don't think you
Yeah.
should be anti-Zen all the time, but yes, you need more prescriptive advice than that.
Yeah. So what when we're thinking about mindset, other than just, take deep breaths and
Mhm.
try to be in the moment, is there something specific that you've worked with clients with that they've found really worked well?
Absolutely, there are lots of things. So let me share a couple bits. So it is important to manage the anxiety that we feel, and there are things we can do to feel less nervous in these circumstances. But after that, two big mindset set shifts that really can help is one, we in these situations we want to do it right. We want to be perfect, and that actually puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. So I have the audacity to tell my students when I'm not doing this work, I teach at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and I tell my students to maximize mediocrity. And you should see their jaws drop because nobody's ever told them to be mediocre. But the logic in
Yeah.
this is that when we try to do it right, we actually get in the way of doing it well at all. Your brain only
Mm.
has so much bandwidth it can use to focus on things. And if part of it is dedicated to judging and evaluating everything I'm saying, that means only a part of it can be focused on the actual connection that I need to make in the moment. So I say strive for connection over perfection. So, how do you do that? You remind yourself that you are in service of your audience. Whenever you communicate, it's about your audience and their needs. So, if that spotlight is not on you and is on your audience, reduces the pressure and it allows you to have full cognitive energy into what you're saying. So all of us should remind ourselves, I am here in service of my audience, regardless of the speaking, and it makes you feel better. And then the second mindset shift that's huge to make is to see these situations as opportunities, not threats. When we get threatened, we get
Mm.
very defensive and we retreat. We act in a very curt, short, tight way. And if I see it as an opportunity to share, to connect, to collaborate, I open up. My responses are more natural and conversational. So just by reminding ourselves that we don't have to be perfect and that we can see this as an opportunity can fundamentally change how we approach these situations.
I love that because I think another thing that happens when we sort of get into this almost like a fight or flight mode where
Yes, absolutely.
you're feeling like, oh, is I know at least for me as well, is that I just want to get it over with. And
Mhm.
then I have the tendency to just try to race through just because I'm like, make it end, make the anxiety or make the awkwardness end. And so if someone is kind of constantly having this problem, is the go-to solution just to try to slow down like more than you think you should?
Well, so to definitely be present oriented, I won't use the word Zen, but no, the more
Yeah.
present you can be, the more you can do. And so slowing yourself down, being present, responding to what's needed and only what's needed can help. Many of us in these spontaneous speaking situations, be it answering questions, giving feedback, making small talk, apologizing, these all have high stakes associated with them. And if you can get present and not worry about those future consequences or potential future consequences, it feels better. It is likely to go better. And you will be able to set yourself up for success for what comes after that. So we really do have to remind ourselves that communication is all about connection. In fact, the definition of the word communication, its origin is to make common. In order to make something common, you
Mm.
have to be present and connected to the other person. So when we might remind ourselves of that, it changes our goal from getting through it to actually connecting and helping someone be better or know something they don't know. So that again, a mindset shift and approach can reduce that pressure we put on ourselves just to get it done.
Well, exactly. I think that for me is always one of the biggest mindset shifts, along with what you said before about just really narrowing in on the opportunity as
Yes.
opposed to the threat and the
Mhm.
anxiety and that they're out to get me. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about, let's say, as we're thinking about opportunity versus threats, you are in, whether it's a presentation or some sort of Q&A, and somebody asks a question that you do not know the answer to, or
Yeah.
you know that you know the answer, but you can't come up with whatever it is, that stat or that fact or that figure kind of on a moment's notice. What's the best way to handle a situation like that?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to break it into two parts. First
Okay.
is number one, you need to make sure that when you don't know the answer, that's what you say. So you say,
Yeah.
I don't know, but immediately you follow it up with, here's how I'm going to find out. So I don't know the
Mhm.
answer. I'm going to go do this and find out and get back to you in a day. Many of us feel that doing that puts us in a diminished capacity. We've demonstrated that
Yes.
we don't know something, when in fact, there's some interesting preliminary research that says if you actually follow up, your
Mhm.
credibility is increased rather than decreased, because you're demonstrating tenacity, you're demonstrating the
Mhm.
ability to problem solve. So my recommendation is always, if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. Here's what I'm going to do to
Mhm.
follow up. And if I have a hunch or inkling, share that hunch or inkling, and then make sure you follow up. So admit it, fix it, and your credibility might actually be enhanced. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that strategically. If you know the answer, always answer. But the not answering might actually have some benefits over what we think. Now, the second part of that is, what if I can't pull out the information I need? Many of
Yes.
us in the moment get lost. The single
Yes.
best way to stay focused is to leverage structure. Remember, I said it's about mindset and about messaging. Having a structure helps you through those times of forgetfulness. Let me be very clear what I mean by a structure. A structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas. So I don't just list and itemize when I answer a question or give feedback. Rather, I package it up in a way that's very useful. Let me share with you my favorite structure in the whole world to give an idea of what I'm talking about. 3 questions: what, so what, now what? If you answer those 3
Mhm.
questions as a response to a query somebody's made or feedback somebody's given you, it will help you and you will avoid getting lost. So if you ask me a question, my answer is the what. I then tell you, so what, why my answer is important. And then I tell you, now what you can do with that answer. So if you're hiring me as a communication consultant, you might say, what's your experience? So I would say what my experience is. I've been doing this 25 years. Why is that important? Well, what that means is I have the experience and ability to make my information targeted to your audience and to be able to configure it in a way that's meaningful. And then the now what is, I'd love to talk about how I could help your group soon. What, so what, now
Mhm.
what? So by having that structure, it gives you a roadmap. You can't be lost if you have a map. So say, I don't know if you don't know, and then use a structure to help you.
I would also add on to that. I think one of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is they beat themselves up. So they leave the meeting or they leave the presentation or they leave whatever it was. And for the next 10 hours, day, 2 days, 3 days, they're ruminating on it. Like, I can't
Mhm.
believe you forgot that marketing stat. You knew that marketing stat. How could you forget it in such a big meeting? And I think that is also very detrimental for then people wanting to improve and get better. So I think it's one of those things where you have to obviously recognize that you missed an opportunity, that perhaps you did know the answer, but that these types of questions, now what, so what, that there is a framework that you can practice
Yeah.
for next time. So kind of dust yourself off, like it
Yes.
just try better next time.
So I love what you said there. You highlight 2 things I discuss in the book and in the methodology I teach. First is rumination is the enemy of present orientation. There is a very famous basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K,
Mhm.
and he
Yeah.
teaches all of his players, or taught all of his players. He's retired now. This notion of next play, and we have to bring this
Mhm.
into our communication. If, as a basketball player, I miss a shot and I sit there ruminating, saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe I missed that shot. I practiced it so many times. The other team is down the court about to score and you're not helping. You immediately need to move on to the next play. Rumination anchors you in the past. Spontaneous communication is all about the present. So rumination is not helpful. What is helpful is reflection after the fact. So when the game is over, at the end of the day, think back, what worked, what didn't work, what can I do differently? So there's a difference between rumination and reflection. I encourage everybody I coach, all of the students I teach, to adopt this next play mentality. Move on. Don't get anchored in the past. And then the second thing you said highlights something that's very important. You said missed opportunities. Many of us fear making mistakes in our communication. Yet we know intuitively that mistakes are how we learn and grow. So I have a way of reframing mistakes. I call them missed takes. You know, when television directors and movie directors film scenes, they do different takes of the same scene. In fact, they have that clapboard, take one, take two. So if I do something that doesn't go the way I want, I simply mentally say, take two, and I try it again. So if I try to explain something and it doesn't go well, I don't ruminate. I immediately take two, and maybe I tell a story that gets at the same point, or use an analogy that reinforces what I tried to say. So rather than getting bummed out and discouraged because I made a mistake, make a missed take and just do it again. So next play and missed take can really help keep you in the present and avoid some of the things you were just talking about.
I love this idea of a mistake, because I just feel like that is something that we can all envision and all kind of wrap our heads around, and then just put it into practice in our everyday lives. So I really love that. I mean, obviously, over the course of your 20 plus year career, you have seen a wide breadth of people that you've worked with. Is there one or two things that sort of across the board you see as like the most common mistakes, or the most common like trip ups for people that you can just see over and over again over the course of 20 years?
Absolutely. Let me share three with you. The first is people start from the wrong place. People start by saying, here is what I want to say. That's exactly the wrong place to start. Rather, you need to focus on, what does my audience need to hear? So it's not about what you want to say, it's about what they need. We must be audience focused. So that means I have to change the examples I use, the jargon or language I use. I have to make my content accessible to my audience. So it's all about relevance for the audience. That's the number one mistake people make. Most people just broadcast information out rather than thinking about, how does my audience receive it? The second thing is people are not clear and concise. They say way more than they need to. The F word of communication is not the naughty one, it's focus. My mother has this saying that I love, and it's so important. It's tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders when we communicate. Be specific, be concise. That's what makes people remember. And then the final mistake people make is they fixate so much on what they're saying, they don't think about how they're saying it. What you do with your body and your voice matters. As we talked about earlier, people just want to race through it. If you slow down, add some emphasis, gesture a little bit, all of a sudden you're adding extra value. So we have to focus on our audience. We have to be clear and concise. And we have to think about how we say what we say, not just the words that we say.
I love this saying from your mom about tell the time, not build the clock. I would also encourage everyone that this can go into personal life as well. I love my husband. He's great. 90% of the time, he will listen to me wax poetic. But 10% of the time at the dinner table, we joke because he will look at me and he'll go 3 bullet points. So like if something has happened that day, he'll be like 3 bullet points, because he's like, I don't want to hear the 20-minute story about like, and then Shelby and I were having a problem with this. He's like, 3 bullet points. What,
Right.
What happened? How did you fix it? What was the outcome? And so that
I love
quote
that
from
you
your
have,
mom reminds me of that.
I love that you have that relationship with your husband where you can both be honest. There are times to tell stories and wax poetic, and there are times to get to the point. The strength and power of a good communicator is to know which of those times you're in the moment.
1,000%. And I also do you find it also sometimes that it is like, do you find any difference between the genders as well? And I ask because there are some situations where I feel that my husband will kind of immediately go into problem solving mode,
Yes.
sometimes to the point of like not listening to the whole problem. But like he hears the first sentence and he's like, oh, well, you know, you should do this. Like, why aren't you doing this? And I'm like, no, you got to hear the whole thing and then maybe just let it sit for a second. And then, so do you find that there's like a gender difference in your work as well?
There certainly are differences, and it's not just gender differences, culture and context, all of these influence
That's true.
communication. And we need to be aware of that. And we have to do what academics call code switching, the ability to recognize the context I'm in, the person I'm speaking with. And again, it's that other centeredness can really help us. There are stereotypes which are based on some reality that men tend to problem solve more quickly than women. Women tend to connect a little bit more on emotion. That doesn't mean that men aren't capable of connecting with emotion and women aren't capable of problem solving. But these are societal, different cultures, different contexts. And by culture, I don't just mean country of origin. You know, my teenagers' culture and the way they communicate is very different than my culture, and we have to understand and adjust because of that. But we can all learn and adapt. I just like the idea that people are stepping back and thinking, hey, my husband always steps in and problem solves. That's useful information. Say, it's incumbent on all of us to be good listeners and good speakers. And I can help and coach others to respond in the way I need them in that moment. So I might say, right now, I just need you to listen and be supportive. Or I might say, can you help me solve this problem? And so we have to be direct with our needs. And we, as the recipient of hearing those needs, need to honor them and respect and give what's needed.
I love this idea of really also just knowing the context that you're in and just
Mm.
really kind of focusing on where are you, both physically and kind of mentally, where
Mentally,
are you
yeah.
in this space? Because I think that that can play a huge role as well.
Absolutely. And the context can actually give us clues to what's needed in the moment. So let me give you an example. Imagine, Kim, you and I come out of a meeting and you say to me, hey, Matt, how do you think that went? If I'm just listening at a superficial level, I might say, oh, Kim wants feedback. So I'm going to itemize all the things that didn't go well, that we could have done better, that next time we need to really focus on. But had I observed the context, you came out the back door, not the front door. You were looking down when you were speaking to me. You weren't your normal energetic self. That contextual information might have clued me in that you really didn't want feedback. In that moment, you wanted support and understanding. And by me itemizing
Mhm.
all the things that went wrong, I actually did us a disservice. I actually might have done more harm than good. So paying attention to the context is important. In the book and in my framework, I borrow from a colleague of mine. His name is Collins Dobbs. He teaches critical, crucial conversations. And in it, he uses this framework that I think works really well for listening. It's three
Mhm.
things: pace, space, grace. We need to slow down the pace. We move very quickly. And if we don't slow down, we might miss nuance. We have to give ourselves the psychological space to be present and observe what's happening. And then finally, we have to give ourselves some grace. That is permission to listen, permission to observe what's happening, and our own intuition. So pace, space, grace are ways to put yourself in the right place mentally and physically to observe that context and then benefit from it.
Ooh, I love the idea of pace, space, and grace. They're so juicy and great. Speaking of space, I'll pick on myself for an example, but one thing that I found for myself is I'm the type of person where, let's say I'm in a scenario and it's kind of moving fast, or maybe I'm like, in a dinner and I feel like someone kind of insulted me, or I don't
Mhm.
know, like I'm the type of person that hours later I'll think of like the best comeback.
Mhm.
But like in the moment, that sort of quick thinking, like very off the top of your head, spontaneous.
Mhm.
I don't quite have that. I'm like a 6 hours later, and then I'm like, that would have been such a good statement. And so, for anybody out there who might be joining us that relates to the situation that I just outlined, is there a way that we can practice thinking faster, or thinking of that sort of quick
Right.
quick reaction or quick comeback more in the moment?
Yes. So two things I'd like to say. First and foremost, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to respond right away. You can
Yeah.
actually take a beat. So I could say, let me think about that for a second. Or I might ask a clarifying question. So you have to say more, which lets me think. Or I might paraphrase what you've said. In doing those things, I buy myself a little bit of time so I can actually answer in a way that I feel better about. So we don't have to respond right away, number one. Number two, this notion of after the fact, I thought of what to say. In becoming a better spontaneous speaker, the whole notion of think faster is all about pattern recognition. I'm
Mhm.
recognizing patterns, much like a chess master or a professional athlete. Part of that expertise that you have comes from recognizing patterns. So if we, in advance of going into an interview or going into a chit chat situation where people are making small talk, some kind of cocktail party, etc., if I can think in advance of what are some of the things that are likely to be said, what are some of the things that are have a high probability of coming up, I can then begin to look for those patterns and have some ideas about how I might respond. I'm not saying lock yourself into one way of thinking. I'm not saying memorize, but it can help me. So if I'm at a corporate event and I know that we're having, excuse me, a cocktail party, it's pretty reasonable that the new corporate vision might come up in the conversation. I can think in advance. What's my position on the corporate vision? What are some of the thoughts I might have or questions I might ask? So that when I'm in the cocktail situation and it comes up, because it's a pattern I've prepared for, I can respond more quickly. So there's work we can do in advance so we don't have that 6 hour day after regret that we didn't say things. And also by buying ourselves just that little beat, by taking a pause or asking a question, we can really help ourselves.
I will also make a personal request that I would much rather somebody take a pause, take a beat, paraphrase what I said, than to say my most annoying sentence, which is, that's a really great question. Ah,
I
I loathe when people do that. Like, no.
That's such a good point. No, I'm joking. I totally agree. There are two things that drive me nuts that people do. One is the good question, because people say, good question, good comment, good question. What I think they really mean is good. I know how to respond. They
Right.
don't mean it's actually good. So I hate that. And the other thing I hate is on the other end of Q&A, when somebody's done answering the question, they'll say, does that make sense?
Oh,
What they're trying to do there, I think, is laudable. I think it's a good thing. What they're trying to do is check in. Did I answer your question? So ask that.
yeah.
Say, do you have a follow-up question? Can I tell you more? When you say, did I make sense? If you do that enough, people are going to start thinking, maybe he doesn't make sense. He's always asking, does he make sense? So I agree with you. If we get rid of good question and does that make sense, conversation and Q&A would be so much better.
So much better. And I love this point from Rachel as well. Um, how do you, Matt, get the sort of ums and uhs and hold on and let me think? Obviously you've been doing this for 20 plus years. So, you also have the what is it, Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours, like the repetition of really practicing. But for Rachel or anybody else out there that is still working on getting rid of those uhs and ums and pauses, do you have any helpful tips or tactics that work well for this?
Yes. So first we have to frame this appropriately. It is normal to have these filler words. Most of us do. In fact, people who write screenplays for television and movies, they build in some of those filler words. So it sounds human. If somebody speaks
Yeah.
consistently with none of that, it sounds robotic. So the goal is not to eliminate. The goal is to make sure that what you do say is not distracting. If I'm saying every other word, that's distracting. So two ways to work on this, and it is not easy. The first is about awareness building. You can't change something you don't know you're doing. And there are tools and apps that you can get that help. There's an app, for example, that runs on your phone that you turn on and it uses your phone's microphone and you program it for the certain filler words you want it to pay attention to, like or so or And every time you use it, it buzzes, beeps, or vibrates. And you're like, oh, I just did it. And because you become more aware, you can control it. There's some that also plug into Zoom and Teams and Meet to do the same thing. So that's the awareness building, and that can really help. The other thing has to do with breathing. The filler words that bother us the most are the ones that come in silence. And then I speak again. Those can be controlled by breathing. If you train yourself to end your sentences and phrases by being completely out of breath, you have to inhale before you can speak again. And the fact is this, we can only speak when we're exhaling. So if I'm inhaling between my main points, I can't say I build in a pause. This takes practice. And the single best way to practice is to read out loud. And as you're reading out loud, at the end of every sentence you read, be completely out of breath, as I am going to be right now. Then you inhale, and then you start talking again, and you finish out of breath. And then you inhale again. And you remove those filler words that happen between the sentences that are so annoying. So this is non-trivial. This is not easy to eliminate. But by becoming more aware and regulating your breathing as you speak, you can remove many of these filler words.
Do you remember the name of this app if people want to download it?
So there are many of them.
Oh, there's many.
There are two I will share. One is called
Okay.
Say It Like So. Say It Like So is one of the apps. And then the other one is called Orai, O-R-A-I. I have no connection to these except that the founders of the companies have shared them with me, and I've tried them, and they do a good job of notifying you. There are many others. There's one that plugs into Zoom that's called Poised, P-O-I-S-E-D. That's another one that, so in a Zoom, it only listens to your audio feed, and it gives you feedback, not just on filler words, but other things as well. There are many, many tools. Those are just some of them. But if you've got a lot of filler words, they might be a good place to start.
I'm interested, obviously, this is a little more futuristic, but you have historical data and knowledge of 20 years of doing this work. And as
Did you just call me old?
No.
Okay, just checking.
I called you experienced.
I see. All right. Very good. Got it.
You're an expert.
Okay.
I'm curious, as you just talked about these plugins, whether it's Poised or apps that you download, do you think that in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see, whether it's plugins or AI or computer software that helps people practice these tools and tactics?
Absolutely, without doubt. We see it now. There are tools that will help you practice. There's a lovely tool I really like. It's called Virtual Speech. It's an app you get on your phone. You put it into VR goggles, and they can be the cheap cardboard ones you get for $5 or the very expensive ones. And it'll show you a virtual audience, and you can signal, is the audience engaged or not engaged, big or small. You can even project slides behind you, so you can get that practice. I have all of my students, when we practice Q&A skills, question and answer skills, I have them go to generative AI like ChatGPT. I say, type in, giving a presentation on this topic, generate 5 questions my audience might ask. And as soon as the question comes up, practice answering it. So yes, I only see more and more of this. Technology is going to help us rehearse and get better at our communication, for sure. I see it all the time.
Yeah, it kind of freaks me out a little. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a good thing. I guess it's progress. But and sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be living like George Jetson or something.
Well, better George Jetson than Wally. But yes, I tend to be an optimist in these things. Now, clearly, I have lots of concern about generative AI and some of the other things. But I do think it can be a tool to help us communicate better. Interestingly, I host a podcast. It's all about communication. And next week, I will be interviewing 2 people who did research into AI and how we can help AI be more creative and help us solve problems better. And the result of their research was we have to be better communicators with AI. So the things that make us better communicators with humans actually helps us get more leverage out of AI. So having a conversation with AI rather than just entering in prompts like we do a search engine can make a big difference. So I am very heartened to know that our skills as communicators are actually going
Yeah.
to help us be better partners with AI to help us be better at communicating. So I actually find some solace in that. It doesn't freak me out. It actually, I think it's cool that what makes us uniquely human is what's going to help us do better when it's partnering with AI.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, when is that episode going to drop? When are we all going to be able to tune in and listen to that?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Think Fast, Talk Smart is the name of the podcast. We release every Tuesday, 20-minute bite-sized episodes all about communication, where I talk with experts about lots of things.
Ah, I love that. I love the 20 minutes. I love the
Yes.
bite-sized facts. That to me is huge.
We've won many prestigious awards, but we've also won Best Dog Walking Podcast, which I take great pride in, because people walk their dogs for 20 minutes, and that's what our episodes are.
That's your dog approved. Your doggy approved.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
That's the best type of approval anyone could ask for.
Right.
So you mentioned some of these different like apps and plugins. I'm curious, are there any that you yourself use now? And it doesn't necessarily have to be to help you on this subject, but I would just be curious. I'm a big fan of kind of seeing what people are using and kind of loving. Like, are there any things that you're using lately that you love?
Yes. So one of the tools I use my voice memo all the time to practice and listen to hear what my voice says. I record myself on Zoom. I have for many, many years used a tool called Superhuman. Superhuman is an email tool that has increased my productivity a ton. I got to meet the founder. I did some coaching in an event. I got to meet the founder. And once he explained what it did, it saves me probably 30% of my email time. Email is a big form of my communication. I love Superhuman. Have you heard of it?
I use it. I love it. I've been on it.
It's awesome.
I got my whole team on it. I'm a big proponent of that platform. Love it.
Yes, totally.
So good. I'm curious, you talk a little bit about your own podcast, but are there other podcasts, or maybe if they're not podcasts, newsletters, or are there any experts or brands or platforms that you still love to learn from, or that you really get excited to get content from every week?
Oh my goodness. I could go on and on. It's almost like you're asking me to pick which of my kids is my favorite. So I teach at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. My podcast is hosted by them. They just released a new podcast over the last month or so. It is my favorite new podcast. It's called If Then. And what they do is they bring on expert faculty members to do a deep dive into some really fascinating topics that are confronting all of us today. AI, how do we work in a hybrid environment? How do we navigate status and power in our business relationships and personal relationships? So If Then is my new favorite podcast. I listen to every episode. It doesn't hurt that I get to work with some of these people, so I know them, but it's absolutely wonderfully educational.
Oh, I love that. And what about any newsletters? Any newsletters that you particularly love?
So I had the good fortune of interviewing Dan Pink on my podcast, and he has a really fun, quick, pithy, but very useful newsletter that comes out, and I always look forward to getting it and reviewing the details in there.
I love it. Well, around these parts, we are huge fans of homework. We love a good homework assignment. So I'm curious if you could give everybody here today homework. It could be to read something, it could be to do something, it could be to download something, it could be to try something. What homework assignment would you give all of us?
Well, I'm going to be very self-serving with part of my homework. As somebody who's expert at giving homework as a professor, first, check out mattabrahams.com. There's a whole bunch of resources that I think will help people, links to the podcast. I talked about that structure, what, so what, now what. I would love for everybody to get used to using that. If you could structure your feedback, your updates, your emails in this structure, it will help. So here's what I'm going to ask everybody to do. As soon as you're done listening to Kim today, I want you to ask yourself, what is one takeaway from the conversation you have? Why is it important to you, and what can you do with it? In other words, answer what, so what, now what for this particular interaction we're having. And then once a day, do it with some communication you have. Maybe it's an email you read, a book or magazine you read, a conversation you had. If you do this for a week by asking yourself, what was it about? Why is it important to me? And what can I do with it? This structure will become part of how you interact and communicate. And I guarantee you it will help you be more clear and concise. So what, now what with the communications that you have help you a lot.
Ah, I love that. And it's just, again, to your point, it's a great way to practice those little daily practices that will build up so that when you're in that situation, you'll be able to think on your feet a little bit better.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's all about practice.
I love this. Okay, Matt, what social media platform do you spend most of your time on? Like, where can people keep learning from you? Is it your website? Is it LinkedIn?
Yes, the answer is yes to both of those. So through the website, and I'm a big, as are you, a big user of LinkedIn. And I'd love for people to link in and connect with me there.
Oh, I love it. Well, Matt, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for taking the time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. It's been a great joy to speak with you, and I love your energy and information.
Oh, well, thank you everybody for joining Matt and I for coffee. As always, we meet here every single Wednesday, same time, same place at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you want to send this to a friend, if you want to follow up and listen later, if Matt mentioned something and you're like, wait a minute, what was that thing again? Don't worry. You can watch this again on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on your favorite podcast network. We have episodes that drop every single Tuesday. You can just simply search Coffee with Kim. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Bye, everybody.